Welcome back, geology fans. A famous quote on geology from Derek Ager comes from his pondering the plate tectonics that we've been discussing. The final conclusion I come to, therefore, he said, is that though the theories of plate tectonics now provide us with a modus operandi, they still seem to me to be a periodic phenomenon. Nothing is worldwide, but everything is episodic. In other words, the history of any one part of the earth, like that of a soldier, consists of long periods of boredom and short periods of terror. These terrors include volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, giant landslides, and tsunamis generated by the phenomenon that is today's topic, earthquakes. Earthquakes not only have the ability to damage property and end lives prematurely, many earth tremors have changed the very course of history, and our topic today is a brief history of major earthquakes and their influence on humanity. The first great well-documented earthquake on record took place in 856 AD in the port town of Corinth, Greece. In a town of about 100,000 people, this approximately magnitude 8 earthquake killed 45,000 of them, almost half the city's population. The first really well-documented earthquake disaster teaches us the lesson that earthquakes don't kill people. Falling buildings kill people. We also learned that a place that gets one earthquake will often get many. The city of Corinth was decimated again in 1928, and the current town is built upon those ruins, and many more ruins below that from the town's repeated destruction. China is very concerned with understanding earthquakes, as the largest loss of life due to quake was in Shesi, China in 1556 AD, when 830,000 people lost their lives. Almost 1 million people. With the global population of the time, this is almost 1% of humanity dying in this single event. The area continues to suffer earthquakes. With the advent of plate tectonics, it was found these recurring earthquakes were generally on plate boundaries, but the exceptions to this rule can be quite exceptional. In 1663, an earthquake occurred in the middle of a continental shield near St. Lawrence River, Canada. A quake on a plate boundary is generally moving the energy through loose, fragmented rocks that absorb the shock waves fairly well. But this Canadian earthquake in the center of the plate went through competent, crystalline rock, allowing this energy to transmit further and stronger, enough to be able to cause church bells to spontaneously start ringing in Massachusetts. This helps teach the lesson that though most quakes are on plate boundaries, no place on Earth is truly immune from earthquakes. But most earthquakes do take place on plate boundaries, such as the greatly influential earthquake generated off the coast of Portugal in 1755. This quake shook not only the ground, but science, philosophy, religion, and politics. People ran to the docks and piers to escape the falling buildings in town, only to watch the sea recede away, exposing a seafloor littered with sunken ships and cargo, and then all were swept away as the sea came back in a tsunami wave of destruction. Giant sea waves hammered northern Africa and reached up the western European coast to Britain, and were reported even in Scotland. In fact, Portuguese explorers in the New World around Brazil reported strangely large waves reaching those shores shortly after this event. Little did those Portuguese explorers know those strange waves were signaling the end of their nation's great run of exploration and empire building. Think of a famous early global explorer, Da Gama, Magellan, Columbus. They all sailed under the Portuguese flag. The destruction of its capital city knocked Portugal out of the lead and even out of the competitive running of expanding colonial powers. In the area of science, Immanuel Kant collected records from people who survived the shaking and found differences in time of arrival and level of damage. Kant also surveyed the damage to surmise that the earthquake had a central area offshore and that the destruction dropped off with distance from that spot. He thought this must be like a pebble dropped in a pond and the waves reduce their impact the farther from the source of energy, or what today is called the epicenter of the earthquake. The Lisbon earthquake was the first to be studied scientifically in this way, with the concept of an epicenter elucidated and its location found. Seismology, the study of earthquakes, developed from this event on. Taking place on November 1st, All Saints' Day, this quake not only devastated Lisbon, but also destroyed all of the area churches and took many lives within, thus shaking the theological concept of a kind and benevolent God to the faithful. By violently shaking the city, this quake was shaking the faith of the devout Roman Catholics dominating the area. Half a century later, in the burgeoning United States, another earthquake did quite the opposite, inspiring sliding religious adherents back to committed actions of faith. The year 1811 had been full of bad omens, with a comet in the sky and rumors of war as 1812 approached. The citizens of the United States in 1811 and into 1812 suffered a series of quakes that were almost beyond numbering. I say almost because one enterprising engineer, Jared Brooks, counted a total of 1,874 shocks, starting from the first big quake on December 16, 1811, through the last on March 15, 1812. Mr. Brooks categorized these into violent, severe, moderate but alarming, and the great majority as barely perceptible. Nevertheless, 35 were alarming, 10 severe, and 8 violent quakes, with 4 being truly terrifying. In the largest of the events, sand boils, water ejected from loose sediment getting shaken, shot up into the air tens of meters. Lowlands were made high and dry ground was submerged. Grand Prairie, a town to the south of New Madrid, much closer to the epicenter, vanished as it sunk below water level. Such cases gave a few of the deaths on land, but most harm was done on the Mississippi River. Most of the losses of life on the river took place when the banks of the river gave way and fell into the water, giving a great energy wave upstream and downstream. A generally told fact of this quake is that it caused the Mississippi River to flow backwards for a period of time. Such slump waves moving upstream could have caused people to think the river was running backwards while it continued to flow in its normal direction. But there is strong evidence that an uplifted fault formed around New Madrid caused the water to actually back up above that point for a period of time until the new barrier was cut through and the water poured back out, yet another risk to the boaters. That would create a temporary upriver flow in that area. Native Americans, who certainly had the greatest loss of life with reports of entire villages disappearing forever, saw it as a warning to turn away from the new European ways and go back to their true religions, while Christian fervor spread throughout the European establishment and settlers. But if all these influential quakes feel too distant, we can see the power and effect of earthquakes right up to the present. San Francisco, 1906, was called the Great Fire of San Francisco to avoid the association with repeated earthquakes. It was devastating enough to shift the Western cultural center from San Francisco down to Los Angeles. There may have been no Hollywood without this earthquake to the north. The largest officially recorded quake ever was off Chile in 1960 with a Richter scale measurement of 9.5, but its distance from major population centers meant reduced death and damage compared to some of the even more recent quakes. Another earthquake with few deaths occurred in 1975, Leonin China. This is the unique distinction of being the first and only predicted earthquake. I'm serious when I say unique. This is the only scientifically predicted earthquake, and because China is China, the government was able to order everyone in the area to stay outside as much as possible. Their prediction and action definitely saved lives, but with a sample of 1, we aren't really sure this was a true prediction or just lucky. No luck at all with the horrible tsunami-producing quake of 2004, which resulted in over 250,000 deaths, most drowned as the sea persistently rose up onto land and then swept them back out to sea. Before this devastation, the United States Congress shot down funding for a Pacific tsunami warning system. After this, the funding went through no problem. The word tsunami comes from Japan, where such giant waves have hit many times. The Japanese know if they get a big earthquake, they should probably expect a tsunami soon after. In 2011, another earthquake followed by tsunamis occurred, eventually doing damage to the Fukushima nuclear power plant and damage to the public confidence in nuclear power overall. As I write this, people are still concerned about radiation pollution in the Pacific. A Tibetan earthquake in 2015 caused massive damage there and set off an avalanche on Mount Everest, which has threatened the future of climbing that iconic mountain and the Sherpa culture. This brief history alone of earthquakes gives many examples of the civilization-altering power of this form of earthly terror. When we come back next time, we will look into how earthquakes are generated here on Earth Explorations.